life at all. When you see the Occupy Wall Street protesters and see them spinning out now around America, kind of reflecting the overall feeling of dissatisfaction with America's economy and so on, when you remember how poor you were and how hard you had to fight for life, what do you think of these protesters? Are they well-intentioned? Do you support them? Do you think they're misguided?
Well, I was born in Harlem, immigrant parents, and my parents always had a job. And we moved to the South Bronx. I don't think either one of them ever made more than $50 or $60 a week. But we were able to get along back then on $50 to $60 a week. Both of my parents worked for as long as I can remember. They always worked, and they always had work. And so people are concerned now that there is not that source of an income. There isn't that work source that I remember. And so what you're seeing with Occupy Wall Street and the others are people who are unhappy, and they're directing their unhappiness right now toward Wall Street and toward those they think are doing too well in our society. I don't begrudge anybody who has earned a good salary. It's part of our capitalist system. And so demonstrating like this is as American as apple pie. We have been marching up and down and demonstrating throughout our history. And so I get a little concerned when demonstrations turn into violence, or when some of the demonstrators demonstrate absolute nihilism and they're really not interested in anything but destruction and tearing down the system.
But do you understand
Yes,
do you understand the anger, particularly towards Wall Street, I think? Because, you know, I've said this many times on my show recently, because I've picked this up from these protesters, that what really gets their goat is that a lot of these banks and bankers got bailed out by the taxpayers. And the first chance they got, when they got back on their feet, to not give themselves huge bonuses again, they ignored that temptation and put their noses back in the trough.
Well, you know, I don't know how to be too critical of that. I mean, it has always been the case that there are certain fields in our economic system, such as in the financial world, where you take big risk and you get big rewards. And one of the things that is of concern to all of us is that there's increasing gap between those who are doing very, very well, and I'm doing well, and those who are not doing as well. And those who are not doing as well are not seeing their lives improving. And so there's frustration, there's angriness there. And this is something that I think our Wall Street friends, our business friends need to think about. And this is something that our political leaders need to think about. And so it isn't enough just to scream at the Occupy Wall Street demonstrators. We need our political system to start reflecting this anger back into how do we fix it? How do we get the economy going again? How do we get businesses that have a lot of money stacked up, how do we get them to invest that money and create jobs?
You said before that, particularly with foreign policy, that America should avoid saying we're going to instill our democracy on everybody, that it should be more reform. When you look inwardly at America now, is that what America needs really, rather than some massive, dramatic overhaul, just reform? It needs to rethink its thinking.
I think we need to take a hard look at our political system, as I've said, and see if we can not get our leaders, particularly in Congress, to start finding ways to reform themselves, to close some of the tax loopholes that exist, to take a hard look at what our expenses are and cut those expenses, and then see whether or not we have the revenue base for the expenses that are left. I've had a lot of business people sit down with me and say, you know, if I try to run my business the way the federal government runs its business, I wouldn't have a business. How can we continue to run a budget of $3 trillion, of which we borrow $1.3 trillion from outside sources, either printing the money or borrowing it from the Chinese? And so China and India, Central and Eastern Europe, lots of Latin American countries now, they're all focusing on wealth creation and fixing their economies and educating their youngsters for that 21st century world. And that's what we have to do, and we have to get on with it.